one of the figures I like to use for any of the listeners that have put money into cryptocurrency over the last little while and enjoyed the pain and suffering that comes with that. If I invested into cyber criminal activity over the last little while, 2,500% ROI. So if I were to put 4K into cybercrime, I'd have $1 million today. So definitely a better investment than cryptocurrency.
Welcome back, everyone, to Cyber Voices, the official podcast of the Australian Information Security Association, but you probably know us as ASA. I am your host, David Savva-Willett, and it is my pleasure to have your company once again as we bring you the diverse voices of the Australian cyber community. My guest today has spent more than 25 years understanding adversaries from defence and national security intelligence to the front lines of global cybercrime disruption. Glenn Maiden is the Chief Security Officer for Fortinet Australia and Director of Threat Intelligence at FortiGuard Labs for Australia and New Zealand. He established the team behind the World Economic Forum's Cybercrime Atlas, a global effort to map the cybercrime ecosystem, and most recently helped create the world's first cybercrime bounty program with Crime Stoppers International, bringing the anonymous tip line into the fight against cybercrime. Today, we're going to flip the usual script a little bit. Instead of asking how we defend, we're going to ask how we fight back. Glenn Maiden, welcome to Cyber Voices.
Thank you so much, David. It's fantastic to be here talking to you.
How does mapping people and motivations in a physical conflict zone translate to mapping the humans behind cybercrime?
No, thanks for this question, David. I don't think I've ever had this question before in the myriad of people that I speak to, and this is actually one of the most interesting parts. Certainly, some of the most interesting work I've done in my deep past. But to be able to answer that, so from a human terrain intelligence, it's a combination of a whole bunch of intelligence disciplines. So geospatial intelligence, which was where I worked at the time, the Australian Geospatial Intelligence Organisation. GeoInt, as we call it, is its collection, analysis and visualization of location-based data. And it describes basically what we're doing is pulling intelligence from the human activity on Earth. So from a commercial perspective, businesses will, like local councils, will look at it to manage properties, to manage rates, traffics, developments, all that sort of stuff. Real estate agents use it to manage some of their listings. Farmers use it to manage paddocks and stuff like that. But sort of then GeoInt became very, very important in disaster management. So things like flood mapping and earthquake damage assessments, wildfire, the spread of wildfire. We've definitely used it a lot in some of the bushfire modelling. And then back when it got to me in that defence, you can use that type of GeoInt to map strategic routes, monitor infrastructure, forward operating bases, vulnerabilities, potential exposure sites. And you can also assess adversary movement. So really, really powerful tool. When you add the human terrain mapping on the top of it, that's when, if we're in a place like where we were back in Operation Slipper in 00s, a place like Afghanistan, what we want to do is collect information about social, ethno-cultural information about the local population. So we want to see the social structures, tribal dynamics, who's the key community leaders, where's all the wells, all that sort of stuff. That helps when our soldiers go into an area to understand sort of some of that, I guess, some of the intelligence, that local intelligence that wouldn't easily be able to be found. So, in counterinsurgency operations, it's really, really valuable to be able to understand those really complex components of the terrain that you're going to be operating in.
How have you managed to pivot this into managing to fight cyber?
I think the whole geospatial, so you would normally use a geographic information system just as your anchor analytical platform. So that's basically stacking layers of intelligence on layers and layers and then looking for where they connect. Traditionally, though, the type of layers that you're enriching, you're looking at things like religious boundaries and economic structures. So you'll be using things like surveys and censuses and interviews. Also, a lot of open source data. So things like newspaper articles, customer sentiment, social media posts, all those sort of things. Like a social media post might give you location information of a particular actor. So when you apply that to the cybercrime world, this is something that I think it's not new, but it's certainly emergent in terms of getting better at it. So as you rightly said, in cyber threat intelligence, we're really, really good at understanding a lot of the indicators of compromise or the IOCs of a threat actor. So, a bad domain or a a file hash of a web shell that they're using or something like that. And then we'll share that across a whole bunch of different platforms in order to stop bad guys and, also around behaviors as well. But that type of intelligence that we're sharing is not around the adversary. So the knowledge of the adversary normally sits in organizations like mine and national security organizations like the ACSC. So this is very, very new in terms of trying to tie the actual malicious, the criminal activity that these guys are doing to and map that out to a bad guy, a real bad guy, a human.
Yeah, and it's the sort of work that I think threat intelligence nerds across the world really would like to sink their teeth into, because you mentioned their IOCs and technical indicators of compromise, and people in jobs like mine, that's kind of what we're traditionally have been really, really focused on, right? So what can I look for within my network and in my environment that tells me that someone's tapping on the door, but not so much who's the actual person doing the tapping. And that sounds like what you've been doing a lot of mapping of, because, we do tend to picture cyber criminals as lone hackers, but we know now, especially in the last few years, that cybercrime now runs more like a business. So you've been doing a lot of work with the World Economic Forum's Cybercrime Atlas. What does that economy look like, and what surprised you the most when you started mapping it?
Yeah, look, I think when we say it looks like a business, I think that's probably, an understatement. It's when you look at the economy, and again, like I don't like to use explicit figures because they're so rubbery that in some cases they're meaningless, and you'll find another source tomorrow that'll be completely different. But one of my sources basically quoted the cyber criminal economy for 2027, so that's only 6 months away, $24 trillion. So, if that's even remotely correct, and you look at the full GDP of Australia, which I think it's about 1.5 trillion. Anyway, it's somewhere around that. That's probably a very, very wrong figure, but it's an order of magnitude higher. So one of the figures I like to use for any of the listeners that have put money into cryptocurrency over the last little while and enjoyed the pain and suffering that comes with that, if I invested into cyber criminal activity over the last little while, 2,500% ROI. So if I were to put 4K into cybercrime, I'd have $1 million today. So definitely a better investment than cryptocurrency.
24 trillion is a staggering number. I think I remember coming across a figure recently that, say for example, in Australia, the residential property market, which is like our largest asset class, is worth I think it's 10 trillion or something like that, or maybe not even that much. Maybe it was 10 billion, and I'm just completely inflating that number.
10 trillion chat's about right though.
Yeah. 24 trillion also sounds like a number that has jumped significantly, because I can remember giving webinars back during COVID where, we used to like to say that, cybercrime is more profitable than the global drug trade. Do you know how much that number has increased, say in the last 5 years as a rough percentage or a ballpark figure?
Look, I don't know the explicit number, David. And as I said, that 24 trillion, I wouldn't necessarily trust that as being sort of completely accurate, but certainly as a indicator. I think in a figure like this, it's very, very difficult. I mean, as you know, the amount of cybercrime activity that goes unreported. I just think there's so many places in this area that we're in the dark. And you mentioned around Atlas. I mean, the whole premise when we first started Atlas was, what do we actually know about these guys? Back as you remember in the start of COVID, Revil was at the TrickBlock, Conti, all these really big cyber criminal organizations. We just said, well, what do we actually know? Is this just a bunch of 5 really, really smart young people that are having a massive impact? Or is it an army of people sponsored by North Korea or something like that? Is it 1,000 people that are part of these gangs? We literally did not know. So the idea is instead of focusing on those IOCs, like you mentioned before, that we traditionally hit in cyber threat intelligence, let's go sort of more to a law enforcement, police investigation type of analysis. So, what's their names, what their aliases, what's their bank accounts, what's their physical address, what's their crypto wallet ID, what's their social media footprint look like, what's the the infrastructure they're using, their bulletproof hosters, all that sort of stuff that normally as part of a compromise where we only seeing the end result of their illegal activities. let's go start mapping this out and see exactly what we're facing in terms of an adversary. And as you say, it's something that we really haven't got a handle on in just how massive that economy is.
Yeah, and it's something that fascinates me as well is the whole crime angle behind cybercrime. You know, those of us who work in the sector for either in the public or private service who, you know, are just probably started in doing some kind of tech corporate IT job have kind of found ourselves in this quasi law enforcement kind of role. I guess we're dealing with the person who's maybe got possession of some drugs in a nightclub versus actually trying to stop the drug cartel, which is the stuff that we really don't sort of see going on behind.
It's a great example.
Yeah, I know. I just came up with it. I was pretty proud of it. We mentioned the Cybercrime Atlas there, though. Can you tell me a bit more about what that is?
Yeah, so it's a project that basically started with a few core members. So there was Santander Bank, there was Coinbase, there was Microsoft and Fortinet as the founding members of this project. And again, so basically the idea was, as I just said, so, you know, what are we actually facing here? So but the way we started going back probably in 2020, just as the lockdowns were all happening, I was up 2-3 a.m. With my European counterparts most nights. So, but we basically busted out some of the cybercrime into 4 example types. So we had ransomware, malware, business email compromise, and card fraud. And then from those 4 categories, we picked about 3 or 4 of the most prominent groups at the time to start mapping out. And you know, from that work, the initial results were fantastic. So we worked with law enforcement partners, Europol, Interpol, very closely with Interpol, people like FBI. We were able to hand over targeting packages to some of those groups with, you know, there was literally thousands of criminals there that were on the streets that, in some cases, they were operating in plain sight. We knew that they were there, or at least there was fingerprints there, but they just hadn't been sort of, you know, from an open source intelligence perspective, they just hadn't been mapped out. So from a people perspective, we've been able to arrest a whole bunch of people. But where it's going to get more interesting over time, and I know we'll talk about the work with Crime Stoppers shortly, is when we start to look at some of these common infrastructures or common illicit services that these criminals are using. And that's when we'll be able to have probably a greater impact on their activities rather than just arresting the perpetrators themselves.
Hey, we're taking a quick break from the conversation because I've got some news that is well worth your time. And that is that CyberCon 2026 is landing once again at the Melbourne Convention and Exhibition Centre, the 14th to the 16th of October 2026. This year's theme is Empowered Together, and the program is living up to it, and tickets are already selling fast. And with a lineup like this, it's no surprise. We've got Sir Tim Berners-Lee, the man who invented the World Wide Web pretty much, Jen Easterly, CEO of RSAC and former director of CISA, and Jason Clinton from Anthropic, taking us inside the work of securing frontier AI. Plus many, many more, including Karen Elazari, Jeff White, Freaky Clown, and more than 450 sessions across keynotes, technical deep dives, policy, and emerging tech. Then, of course, there's the multiple villages, the famous block party, and 5,500 of your peers all in one place. Don't miss out. Registrations are available now at www.cyberconference.com.au. We'll see you in Melbourne. Because we're talking about defense here, right? Our industry has spent many, many years perfecting defense. Firewalls, IDSs, IPSs, cloud security posture management, MFA, it's layers upon layers upon layers of control. Like, I feel like there's always some new problem I didn't know I had that I need some new defense for within the organizations I've been CISO for. Why is better defense alone, though, never going to be enough? I'm really interested to get your thoughts on that.
Well, I don't know. Like, I think the problem is what does better defense look like? And, you know, we could argue, have we actually perfected defense? And if you look at the amount of compromises, the amount of breaches, we've got so putting my Fortinet hat on, we had the number of ransomware victims that we were able to just identify from our own research and our own data this year. It was up something like 370% in terms of ransomware. So this is just between 2024 and 2025. I would have liked to have thought that that would have at least plateaued, if not gone down. Like, as the assumption being that we're getting better at defense, we're getting more resilient. But, those figures tell a different story. So I'm really, really disappointed in there. So I don't think that we've mastered defense. And I think my perspective, David, is there's really good technical capability out there. So, and that's never a single bullet, but I mean, you mentioned some of those technologies you mentioned, Fortinet and others can sell you some absolutely world-leading defense technology that will do what it says on the packet. It'll work. But the gaps that we've always had is on that people and process side. So we haven't got enough people to care and feed these systems. And in many cases, the operational overlay over there just is where we fall over.
Probably lost count of the amount of organizations I've worked with or friends in CISO roles at other organizations who all told the same story of like, yeah, we drank the Kool-Aid and we bought all of the products, but the 3 people I have in my team don't have the capacity to be looking across all of them. And you're right as well. Like the numbers are staggering, and there's, I don't want to say a complacency, but we've certainly got used to cybercrime. I know I listen to a lot of cyber headline podcasts on my way to work, right? The 10-minute, here's just the what's happening in the news. And I can listen to multiple of those because I have a long drive to work. And each one has different headlines that have all happened in sort of like the last 24 to 48 hours. Problem is only going to continue to increase, and we're more about how we actually survive or contain and recover from a cyber incident as opposed to maybe 5-6 years ago pre-COVID, where it was, absolutely no cyber incidents, make sure they don't happen. What are your thoughts on how we disrupt this trend in cybercrime, and what does real disruption in cybercrime look like in practice to you?
Yeah, I'll just make one more point before we get to the disruption side. But one of the things that I'm really worried about, especially in our corner of the world in Australia and New Zealand, so we'll hear about, the big breaches, that you and I can talk about till the cows come home. But because we're economies where it's 90% sort of small business and a lot of small to medium enterprise, and you look at the thresholds for example, the reporting for ransomware, most of our organizations won't hit that threshold. So I think there's probably a whole bunch of unreported cyber activity, and whether it's only just, someone's lost $100 because they, bought something off Facebook Marketplace, whatever it is. But, all the way up to people paying, if not tens of thousands of dollars worth of ransom. So I think that's probably the unreported soft underbelly of our economy here. So that's something where I guess, sort of, if you think of some of these really sophisticated cyber criminals, they're a organization, but they're really spreading their tentacles quite broad and making a lot of money out of smaller transactions rather than necessarily hitting the big ones like the MGM or the Jaguar Land Rover that we see in the news all the time.
With the disruption side of thing, I wonder if this is where maybe some of your work with Crime Stoppers comes in as well, because this is an organization that's worked in physical crime for close to 50 years, so, half a century. Tell us a little bit about the Cybercrime Bounty Program with Crime Stoppers International, and how does that work, and what can people expect when they pick up the phone or lodge something with them?
Yeah, look, I'm really excited, David, about this particular program. So what we were thinking probably about 12 months ago is you look for bounties. There's a bounty on as you said before, a drug dealer or something like that. You can collect a bounty. There's FBI's Most Wanted, etc. And you can collect a bug bounty if I find a problem with a particular piece of software or hardware or something like that. I get a bounty. But in terms of, I guess, prosecuting the offenders here, again, there wasn't a lot. So about 12 months ago, I spoke to Hayley Van Loon, who's the CEO of Crime Stoppers International, and coincidentally, she's an Aussie, so she's based in Australia, which made it a really, really serendipitous sort of meeting. But how can we actually set up a bounty program? And this was with my Fortinet hat on. Now, as you say, Crime Stoppers has been around for 50 years. It operates in 100 countries. There's about 800 Crime Stoppers chapters across the world, and they've got 24/7 coverage. So they've actually already got most of that apparatus in place for these traditional crimes. So it's working with Hayley and Crime Stoppers International, we've set up now a bounty program for cyber criminals. Now, we will probably post our first bounty in the next week or so. So we've basically got some targets that we want to place a bounty on. So if I put a tip in on one of these threat actors to if I know something about one of these threat actors and I submit a tip, I can potentially get paid anonymously 12 months later or whatever it is when they're prosecuted and arrested. So this is something really, really new, and this is going to give us a real new visibility into some of the cyber criminals and hopefully get a few bad people off the street.
That's fascinating. It's beyond what we traditionally hear about with bug bounty programs, where you've got to have a bit of a technical research, maybe white hat hacker background to be able to go and find bugs and earn a bit of a payday. But this is I think if I'm hearing this correctly, most people who probably work in the sector who have some level of intelligence around or through what they do through work and the kind of intelligence they're gathering there around IOCs or consistent behavior that they may be seeing coming from a particular threat actor could potentially contribute to this program, right? And potentially earn a bounty off it if it's someone that Crime Stoppers have put a bounty on. Am I kind of reading that correct?
100%, David. Also, you can submit a bounty even if there's not. You can submit a tip, I should say. Even if you've got some intelligence on a particular human that's doing bad things, you could submit a tip when it's not a bounty if you just want to do the right thing. But one of the other things that I'm most excited about this is, and this is where we'll get a little bit dark, I guess, in terms of the conversation. But now that the level of organised crime that's operating in the cyber criminal space, they're not just perpetrating cyber crimes. There's a lot of other really, really horrible crimes they're doing as well, all the way from human trafficking, child sexual exploitation, material production, you name it. These people are involved in all these different crimes. So what I firmly believe is that there'll be some commonalities in the infrastructure that they're using. So I'm hoping as organizations like Fortinet chase these cyber criminals, as we've always done, that next level of intelligence and intelligence fusion that we'll do in partnership with Crime Stoppers will hopefully identify sort of some of the support systems for these really, really horrible people, and we'll start to be able to pull not just cyber criminals off the streets, but some really, really horrible traditional criminals as well.
Yes, and it's a theme that's been running through a lot of our conversations and episodes on this podcast recently, which is bringing things back to the real human element behind cybercrime perpetrators and the victims of. But there's a message that sometimes gets lost that I think a lot of people don't know, especially if they're not super close to cyber as an industry or a sector, that human impact often goes to the people who are perpetrating the crimes. Because sometimes the people who are running the scams, people who are being victimized themselves, you mentioned human traffic there. I've heard stories of people being tricked to crossing specific borders and then having their passports confiscated and locked away and forced to work on scams and other sorts of things as well. So
scam centers are a big business in and of themselves. So, again, that's another area between the WEF and the World Economic Forum and Crime Stoppers, an area we want to start attacking, because these scam centers, that they're not an anomaly. These are very, very common, and they're very much in our part of the world, just to our north. So it's as you say, it's horrible. You've got a potential victim of cybercrime or fraud here, and then someone that's also the victim that's perpetrated that crime, absolutely in poverty and in horrible conditions, just a couple of hours to our north. It's there's no happy side to that story, unfortunately.
No, there's not. There's not at all. And some of these people are doing it against their will. Some of them are doing it as a genuine job as well. Let's not trick ourselves. I've seen some undercover footage reminds me of a call center I worked in 30 years ago, right? Where it's just rocking up, doing a couple of scam calls, going to lunch, coming back, doing a few more scam calls, and then heading off for the day. So it's a far more layered and as you say, like dark world than I think most people know.
I think also the cyber criminal landscape, I guess, could be categorized in 2026. There's a lot of those sort of shiny hunter type threat actors out there. So they're doing it for clout, they're doing it for a bit of kudos as well as money. So that again makes it harder from a threat intelligence perspective to track multiple people who might have different TTPs, different using different tools, different modus operandi. So, yeah, it's very, very complex at the moment trying to work out exactly what's going on in that criminal ecosystem.
And Shiny Hunters is one that's definitely making a name for itself of
Yes.
late. They are becoming quite a nuisance for a lot of people, but also within that dark underworld are attracting a lot of attention and prestige. And I imagine it's probably a case where some of the people who are at the top of their game as perpetrators of cybercrime would be like, those would be the guys to go and work for sure, right?
Yes. I mean, we actually, FortiGuard Labs, we engaged with it wasn't part of Shiny Hunters, he was part of some of those loosely affiliated groups, but he was just a young bloke from overseas in Eastern Europe, just needed to conduct a couple of cyber criminal activities to get his family out of the country he was in. So, this is where it's hard. In a lot of cases, it's not necessarily someone that's sitting like Dr. Evil in their chair patting a white cat or something like that. It's a lot of desperate people for money, and obviously, the cybercrime is a pretty easy crime to commit, and it's very, very unlikely you're going to get caught in most cases.
How does the fight with cybercrime work when it comes to this whole like crossing international borders and politics around it, right? Because, you could be fighting the good fight here in Australia, but we could be often working with criminals operating out of areas where we have little to no jurisdiction. And any stories or any anecdotes on how that works?
Look, I think that's one of the biggest protections that these criminals are using. I actually got scammed out of something that I bought on Facebook Marketplace. So it was a very sophisticated website that was sort of linked to this Facebook Marketplace. I spoke to a human with a New Zealand accent. I went to an Australian bank, had an ABN, and that money for the item that I purchased was gone within 30 seconds, and as was the seller on Facebook Marketplace. That money went straight overseas and is completely hard to track. So I spoke to New South Wales Police. The bank was a bank in Victoria, Bendigo Bank, so they got a warrant with the Victorians to go and chase it via the Victorian police. But again, completely gone by the moment that money sort of touched that Australian bank and moved overseas. So that's why we're working closely with people like World Economic Forum, Interpol, Crime Stoppers International. So it helps us overcome sort of some of those jurisdictional barriers that these bad guys are using for escaping the apprehension.
Yeah, and a great story of vulnerability there around how anyone can kind of fall victim to it. I've had scammers come after me, and sometimes in times of weakness, maybe I've gone sort of the next step and then realized, whoa, hang on, what am I doing? I think it happened to me once when an airline lost my partner's luggage when we were traveling somewhere, and we were super stressed. And I think one of us made a comment on the airline's like social media page about something, just trying to find help from anywhere. And then a scammer picked that up and messaged us like going, hey, hang on, we'll help you track this down. And we sort of replied once and then was like, hang on a sec. Whoa. I work, like, why am I being so dumb? I do this for a job.
David, I try and be really open about that. So obviously I was absolutely, I was so cranky and ashamed that, we should know better. But the reality in 2026 is the social engineering laws are going to get that good and are that good that even you and I can't tell a difference between what's legitimate and what's not. So I'm always very, very open and transparent about that story because I think there's a lot of shame there. So, and I think that's stopping people from reporting some of these crimes. So it might be our 80-year-old grandma or something like that that's been scammed and she's too ashamed to tell her family. So I think that's really important just to say these scammers, that's all they do. They do it for a living, and they're going to eventually con the best of us if given their time and their patience and their willpower.
Yeah, right. And if people like you and I who've spent decades working in this sector can come quite close, if not falling victim to this kind of crime, yeah, you're right. Absolutely, anyone can. So, Glenn, to round things off, for my fellow Chief Information Security Officers out there, SOC leads, analysts, anyone listening who may never actually kind of run a full takedown or bounty themselves, what can we all be practically doing to contribute to disrupting cybercrime rather than just defending against it?
I think so. There's probably one lesson or one piece of advice that I'd like to give. And I think it's around being very, very proactive in terms of cyber defense and things like tabletop exercises. I've never been to a tabletop exercise where there hasn't been a gap in the defense strategy that hasn't been identified or teased out. So I guess in terms of attribution, it's not really something we care about as people defending our own organisations. We just care about containing, isolation, returning to operations. There's nothing wrong with that. But from a preparation perspective, I want to make sure that we've all got enough resilience. So when something does happen, and it will 100% happen. It's not an if anymore; it's a when. We don't have a CISO like yourself in that position of saying, do I have to pay a ransom to get this, this service back online or this data back? So I think a little bit of proactive investment now means that we don't have to be in that position where our only choice is to pay one of these horrible cyber criminals that aren't just doing cybercrime. They could be affiliated, or they are affiliated with organised crime, or even things like counter-terrorism. So getting in that position where we don't give them the opportunity to take advantage of us, I think, is the most important advice.
Well, thanks very much, Glenn. It's fascinating to hear even just a glimpse of some of the work that must be going on to even begin to try and disrupt the global reach of cyber criminals and cybercrime gangs out there. And thank you as well for just reminding us as well of some of the human elements behind this, both on both sides of the fence of cybercrime, but also that need to be vulnerable and for people to be open about the fact that, hey, it's going to happen to everyone at some point. Hey, listeners, if this conversation resonated with you, please make sure you subscribe to the show and leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or your preferred platform of choice. If you have any feedback or anecdotes or stories that you'd like to share based on today's episode, we'd love to hear from you. cybervoices@asa.org.au. And thank you very much to my guest, Glenn, for sharing your voice with us today.
Thank you for having me, David. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Cyber Voices. Our music is by Sanar Garut, our show artwork is by Studio Quarantine, and we record our show at This Is a Studio in Pran, Melbourne, part of Popplant Productions. Please make sure you follow the show on your podcast platform of choice and leave us a 5-star review. This will help others find the show. Also, please follow the association on LinkedIn and Instagram. If you want to add your voice to our ever-growing chorus of diverse cyber voices, have questions, feedback, or would like to be a sponsor, you can do so by emailing us at cybervoices@asa.org.au. That's cybervoices@aisa.org.au. Are you an ASA member? If not, you should consider joining our network of over 12,000 members across Australia. An ASA membership can open doors, build professional networks, create lifetime friendships, and offer exclusive training, events, and other perks. Become a member today by heading to our website at asa.org.au. That is all for today. I hope you will join us again next time on Cyber Voices.